Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I don't like that Sunil plays with me and puts me up first, immediately after I need to get things rolling. For example, today we don't have coffee. But we'll fix that as well. So I don't have that much time, so just to run and start and stuff. So this is a very, very long title, which is extremely precise in my view, might not be in yours. And I'm going to read it out loud. I'm going to do this several times during the presentation because I tried to build a presentation. I tried to kind of do two things at once. I tried to have both the actual presentation for the conference and the presentation people can read because we share presentations on Slack. It didn't work out for me. Some slides have no text, some slides have many slides have way too much text. I learned from this, but we'll manage. So efficiently managing co-evolutionary arms races with a potential highly adapted adversary. I gave this talk for the first time in Tallinn, Estonia in 2009 or 8 or 10. And then gave this at ACOD at a turbo talk at the first ACOD in 2017. But bottom line, I call it fighting superbugs or superbug eventuality conflicts, or SBECs as I like to dub them right now. So we're going to look at the talking points for this talk because I'm going to run through a lot of things and I'm not so sure the structure is perfect. First of all, we continuously enter arms races. We have a lot of adversaries, we start fighting them, we start engaging with them, and they start getting better, and we start getting better, and it's endless. Number two, we create a situation where we help them evolve into sometimes an unbeatable position. And three, we want to avoid this scenario. We want to manage it to our advantage. Two different interests here. To get into the theory with a lot of text, we unknowingly, sometimes knowingly, create these situations. Why do we do this? How do we do this? Then we know that these will result in arms races. And we know that some of these actors will, or their techniques are going to turn into something we can't beat as a fact. We want to turn the tactical eventuality into a strategy. We want to manage that. We want to lock the adversary into the arms race. And in fact, we want to try to even direct their evolution through our responses. And when we essentially do all of this, we can start saying we are actually doing something strategic as opposed to just operations. And superbugs, of course, what we're talking about here, the eventuality of them becoming unbeatable, is taken from antibiotic resistance. Moving on. So it was 2006, and I was running a blog, as you can read. But the thing is, I started collecting analytics. Who is coming to read my blog? What are these references? And I kept seeing these PHP inclusion attacks. And PHP inclusions were a known factor. I think Ryan McGee and Magoo spoke about them at DEF CON even a couple of years before that. But I started looking at what they are, and they were all bots. Everybody was turning web servers into bots, and nobody bought command control servers, and nobody really knew it was going on, even though it would be obvious that it would not always be just endpoints acting as bots. So what would you do to stop this? How would you react to this attack? Anybody? Perfect. Nothing. Cloudflare. Okay. Makes sense. So I kicked at it. I blocked the attackers, which was really cool. Evil IP addresses must die, as I like to call this. But when that happens, what would happen next? Maybe we would even create this blacklist. What would happen after that? They move. They're fast. They're going to start moving their IP addresses. Because up to that point, 87% of them were kept using the same IP addresses. And the minute I started blocking them, instead of ignoring them and being on top of it or collecting intelligence, that's when things started going downhill. I was in an arms race. And that's where I started really looking at this topic. Now, back then on Nanog, if anybody here was on that mailing list, we had one of the first, JSON was on it, the information sharing list, DA, there was one before that, there was NWP, a lot of the original trust groups. And we're talking, should we take down these command and control servers? We take them down, they pop up elsewhere, and they're starting to get better at it. Should we just leave them on? And network operators said, I can't leave this badness in my backyard. What are you talking about? So I argued about it. Paul Vixie argued about it. This is from 2006, where Balik says, stomping a botnet is actually a bad thing to do. Read that again, please. And he was just open to it, but most people were not. And I can't blame them. So the part one of this talk is essentially the mechanism of the game. How do we breed these superbugs? So we try to solve a problem, we try to make it go away, and the most important line in this presentation is, although it's the second one in a slide that's in the middle, we have a bias to action. We just like to do things. And that's good for us as operational people, but it doesn't help us solve the problem. Our strategy is reactive, therefore, each action would affect the action after it and the action after that. Now, obviously, that's not good, but it might be the best thing we can do. So before I start going into it's not good, let's just keep in mind it might be the best thing we can do in many scenarios. And we end up with a very resilient superbug that we can't necessarily fight. So whether it's because we firefight, whether because it's a minimal work unit, we're lazy, shortest path to goal, the player is not aware of the situation or long-term situation, we're unable to think of a different path, or even we avoid planning, avoid wargaming, which is something everybody likes to not do. Whatever the reason we get into it, we want to get out of it, and we fail. Now, I actually took the Wikipedia definition. An arms race is a competition between two or more parties for the best armed forces. But a more modern definition might be the relative goal of staying ahead of the other competitor, meaning I don't necessarily want to win. Now, with superbugs, with SBECs, is winning even on the table? I think it's more than just an arms race. I think it's a co-evolutionary arms race. It's a struggle between a competing sets of co-evolving genes that develop adaptations and counter-adaptations against each other, resembling an arms race. Anybody here working in security feels this line? Isn't this our life? Day in, day out? Now, there are a few examples where this happens, and I would like to go through them very quickly, just to show you this happens everywhere, but here are the operational examples. So the one is spam, and this is Gadi, meaning spam is a much more complex concept, and it has a very complex history, but shortly, we had open relays, we had direct email, we had spoofed email. We had botnets starting to spread out spam, and more botnets, and spam kept growing and growing, and we could see that with everything we do, the bad guys adapt and do better just to keep in the game. Botnets. So anybody here was on IRC at the time? Oh yeah. So we had IRC chat servers, then password-protected chat servers, private IRC servers, we had P2P networks, fastflux DNS, and today to take down a botnet command control server, we need Microsoft to do a lot of investigations, and the State Department to step in, and for people to get arrested, and then maybe we can take down a botnet, and even then somebody else just continues to work after we arrested somebody. Taking down a botnet is implausible nowadays. You can argue with the point with me if you like, I'm happy to do it, but that's my take on it. Ransomware and crypto lockers. Another great example of something we can't really do too much about. And terrorism, just to show you something outside the realm of cybersecurity, although not everything is connected. The terrorists make a mistake and they die. It's as simple as that. Now, they learn OPSEC, they learn to be more careful, they know what to use, they plan, they source better missions, and that's fine. That's not very good for us, trying to stop them. A structured hierarchy is vulnerable. You can take out somebody in a social network. So the KKK, for example, invented leaderless resistance using decentralized leadership, sales-based systems. We have seen Al-Qaeda, although this is not completely accurate, but for the sake of the presentation, using a similar structure. They built it more like a franchise rather than central control. And lastly, modern success is really built on a few large attempts a year, as opposed to doing a lot. And they essentially live and glorify the past glories, in a way. It's not terrorism is not a problem, but that's kind of, in a way, inaccurately, but to the point how they evolved. Then there is an education example. I'm going to go through this quickly. Anybody here did the SATs? So I did the psychometric test in Israel, and I don't remember what it's called, but instead of solving something algebraically, they would say just assign the value of 0, the value of 1, and you'll get an answer whether it's true or not, or what answer to pick out of the 4 options. Then the board for the psychometric test in Israel said, okay, so if you put in 0, that's not going to be enough. We're going to add 1, and then we're going to add 2. And then algebraically solving it became longer, and it became unviable. These things are not limited to security, digital or otherwise. It's a learning conflict, as a friend of mine likes to call it. We have seen the same thing with SAM missiles and bombers. That's a military example. How about deepfake, going into the same kind of cycle right now? So we can add to that just a little bit of a defensive side. We can look at airport security. Anybody remember when the last time a plane was abducted was? I may not like airport security, and it may be useless for what we think of security, but that doesn't happen anymore. So it must be doing something right. Iron Dome, oh, that's the typo. Iron Dome, rocket fired toward Israel. Politics aside, nearly no rocket is going to get through. People leave their lives. That is a sort of equilibrium. A good one, a bad one, I'm not sure, but that's no longer a serious threat. It's more of an annoyance, even though people sometimes die and don't want to dismiss that. Suicide bombing is in Israel, now nearly non-existent, where there are thousands of threats a year in the beginning of 2000s. And military coups in South America, we don't really see those either. So there are things that happen on the other side that are similar. So why don't we exit this loop? Why don't we just try to do something different? We're in a strategic stable game. Even if a strategic solution was possible, it becomes unattainable as we get into this. And that's the annoying part. Now, with time, opportunities shift. The path disappears for us in the linear evolution. In a way, the cost of shift is too high. Changing path in the middle of the game might leave you vulnerable. And most important, comfortable. We feel comfortable within the current paradigm. This is from scientific revolutions and all the work around that, which I'm not an expert on, what we do have an expert on here. So we don't. And then I would like to quote the frustration of going to work every day, knowing you will lose. It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. Anybody knows where that's from? Alice in Wonderland. I think through the looking glass, but yes, thank you. So we have the Red Queen hypothesis. Essentially, in reference to an evolutionary system, continuing adaptation is needed in order for a species to maintain its relative fitness among the systems being co-evolved with. And that is what we do in security today, and we're losing. How do we handle this? So we try to be strategic. We try to take this tactical situation and do something more complex about it. Win the game by not playing. Remember that quote? Where is that from? War Games. Of course, everybody here saw it. Anybody here not see the movie? Ah. Okay. So anybody here is a Star Trek fan? Anybody who knows that episode will appreciate this. The idea is, if we indeed assume the superbug will happen, we no longer play to win. We just play to not lose, to deny winning or victory to the adversary. So if we can't bring about a decisive victory, we set a new goal. We want to prevent the eventuality. So we maintain equilibrium with the adversary. Because we want to assure business operations. And this is a symbiosis, preventing one from getting the extreme upper hand, as we have seen happen quite a few times in our game here. And we have what I call a time window. I haven't found a better term for it, where we construct kind of more time leading up to the eventuality. Meaning, we want to prolong that window. So we ask a few questions. How do we control or guide the evolution of the adversary with our own actions? How do we do something with this time window? And tactically, how do we actually prolong, reverse the progression, or prevent it from even forming? It's like the 5 Ds, only 3 here for this time window. So an example is Israel and Gaza. Again, I'm Israeli, so I'm taking examples close to home, where I wrote accept. That's what happens when you edit your slides last minute. Thank you for noticing my typos. You accept for occasional pain or cost. Oh, sorry, this is not a typo. See what happens? We accept occasional pain. We accept occasional costs to avoid all-out war, to avoid going in and killing a lot of people. I'm not saying that's the only strategy, and haters of Israel would say it's a completely other strategy, but that's fine. The idea is that's the only thing we can do to not continue the escalation and just have once every year or two some escalation happen and then revert to the original state. So this time window, I tried to look for terminology within security, and I came up with business continuity. So we have the recovery point or objective, or RPO, in disaster recovery and business continuity. And we have RTO, and RTO should be much smaller than RPO ideally. Now, the time. Essentially, the SBC time window, RTO, is the window where the defender can prevent the development. Meaning, you can either prevent the superbug or prevent the production of the superbug. The implication is the more you prolong the time window, you can create an induced reduction in attack tempo. So I'm not sure this analogy works. I added it like 5 minutes ago, these two slides. But it's a way to look at it that is more concrete. So this is more of a life cycle I tried to create, a flowchart really. What do we do about this? How does it work? So an event occurs, that's fine. We automatically respond. So if we're locked into the action-counter-action arms race, we end up developing a superbug. Now, if we have awareness before responding to the event, we can ask a question. Is there a final strategic solution to the problem right now? If the answer is yes, execute on it. That's great. If it's no, then you need a considered response. And further, you need to observe and collect intelligence to see what's going to happen next, to be more careful in the way you respond to these threats. Now, choosing a response strategy is complex, but that's kind of a basic of learning about strategy. You can discover alternatives, plan them, compare them, build them, game them, and activate when they can bring significant outcomes. Now, the question also is this adversary or skiddy or something like that worth our time? If you remember my example about web server botnets and PHP, how much was that really worth my time? Shouldn't I just block it and deal with it? So always consider whether there is strategic action and if it's even needed. So we have environmental considerations. For example, is your environment asymmetric? Are there economic incentives here? Are there no repercussions to the other side, like in our case? There are nearly no repercussions to the attackers, effectively. So we assume the offensive side adversary is more likely to become the superbug due to the nature of an asymmetrical environment. It's an assumption. I didn't research this, but I believe this, given what I've seen so far. And more than that, given this assumption, do you want to attempt a decisive action? Do you hope defeating the adversary, or do you try to contain the threat at a manageable level, but not eradicate it? Try to sell that to your boss. Try to sell to your boss, we're going to keep these botnets up. We're going to let these people come in. Not easy to do. So the goal of the considered response should be to affect the action-counter-action evolution. So the threat level never rises to the superbug status and maintains a manageable problem. There are also political considerations. So number one, we don't game the adversary. We don't play with these things. We don't like it, and we fear what's going to happen, and that's reasonable. Few, and if any, operators, as we discussed, would allow the badness to stay. And lawyers would not like you doing that either. Lawyers would be, what? You're letting us do what? Are we doing it ourselves? Are we liable? But the system is an alternative process, and it won't fit everywhere or anywhere necessarily, but it can be a fit. For example, Iron Dome. So thinking about it makes sense. So this is something Gadi Evron came up with, and by the way, Jerry is sitting right here in the crowd, and he helped me with this presentation. Some of you did, so I appreciate everybody who helped me out. The actor with the faster innovation cycle has a higher likelihood of becoming the superbug, leaving asymmetry aside. I tried to understand why would they become a superbug and not us, and asymmetry was just one of the reasons. But the innovation cycle speed seems to be the best answer, but again, I did not research this thoroughly. So let's move on. I believe all these response strategies, the response strategies exist to deal with this, and more than that, they're cross-platform. We discussed the SATs, we discussed terrorism, we discussed botnets, we can discuss APTs, we can discuss all these different things, deepfakes. But because it's all cross-platform or multidisciplinary or whatever you would like to call it, we can work all these strategies in across the entire landscape. So the first strategy, reset the situation. So we want to, you know, with original superbugs, not antibiotics, but rather spraying fields with pesticides, the local bugs would grow resistant. So you'd come and say, okay, let's stop spraying for a year or for a season, and the previous bugs will gain in fitness and we'll be able to spray again. So we're resetting the situation. There is a case with Israeli Shin Bet where they had a 500 most wanted program in with the Palestinian Authority, where the Palestinian Authority didn't have the capability to take over their own land, to be able to actually rule the villages and the cities, because every small village would have some wanted person ruling it. And if they came in, the locals would warn them, they could risk their own people firing on them, and also they were friends, so they would warn the guy to go away. they just said, okay, who are the 500 of them who have not killed somebody, have not done something which we can't forgive, and can we just forgive them? Can we just pardon them? And they did, and the Palestinian Authority went in and was able to control 500 more villages than it did before. They reset the situation. The thing is, are you willing to take the loss of a season without crops? Another strategy is redirecting the evolutionary path. You can do something to try and get them to do something else. I remember in 2007, network operators were all talking about port 25 outgoing on dynamic ranges. Why should anybody at their home be able to start their own mail server and send out spam? And surprisingly, port 25 on dynamic ranges for many ISPs around the world was blocked. All these spammers had to start using real email accounts. So what they did is started using 100 or 1,000 real accounts or real computers instead of one computer they took over. There were implications in infrastructure, there were implications in infections worldwide. But we moved them to our own infrastructure where we could control them. Kind of like where spam works right now on Facebook. In military terms, we kind of, this is the theater of war between conflicts, where we can play this game. Bigger elsewhere. This is from PR. You know, something happens, let's make a war happen somewhere else so they forget about it. There are little jokes about this. So in the first internet war in Estonia in 2007, where I had the luck to go and work and help them out, they kept focusing on the president's website. The attackers kept attacking the president's website. The president there is like the queen. There is a prime minister. And there are only 20 visitors a week to the president's website. So what do? Do you go and protect the bank? I mean, do you do broken windows theory? Do you go with military strategy? Do you go with managerial strategy? You have two people. Who do you defend? The answer is the banks. But if the president's website goes down, this is about people, everybody's going to say, ooh, we took it down, yeah, let's attack more. So how do you choose to actually do these things? Do you let them take down the president's website? Do you do something else? So higher level thinking, but it rather never happens. Second is maintain equilibrium. You can maintain the red queen scenario, online fraud, you know. You can waste resources. They can innovate. For example, believing their inferiority is because of some failure, not because a technical issue, not something that you did. Faster innovation cycles. Brinksmanship doesn't usually work, but we can talk about that. But skipping all of this, some additional thoughts. Coventry. Do we want to maintain intelligence over actually taking action? How long would it take for a group to forget about their lessons about being shot if they use their cell phone? The only research I found was in traffic shaping. There is a cop on the road, we'll forget the cop after 3 weeks. And we speak up here about actors and persons and organizations, but we could be dealing with bacteria, the impersonal. So there are edge cases. Ultra-fast SBCs, for example, the account stuffers, the validator groups that try to do fraud. Do we let them win? Do we immediately block? Actually, we don't. This is amazing, but a lot of organizations today let them win and let them come in, and then once they start acting, they block them very, very quickly. It maintains their visibility, but we need to let them feel like they're winning sometimes. We have to run faster than the other guy sometimes, if it's a zero-sum game. We don't necessarily need to win together. And then we have the slow build, for example, the 38th parallel. We slowly do improvements over time until we change the situation. Sam versus Ballmer is another case like this. The US started with mid-term or short-term goals, tactical responses to SAM missiles, fighter bombers attacking, and the real bombers going further out into the field where they're safer. And the race isn't over, and of course this continued in other ways. The race isn't over. The F-35 can operate in an S-300 environment. And then you have France, when the cathedral, what's his name? Notre Dame, I think, I don't remember, was burned last year. Apparently this happened before. Many, many times. So they pre-plant trees in the Versailles Palace and they're already ready to respond. We've seen things happen in a different way where people get used to actually recovering. So we have a point on equilibrium. Bad guys do the minimum to get in. We do the minimum to keep them out. So we're not burning through techniques because we were back to the minimal path or whatever it is. So security utopia for right now, I'm not talking about what it needs to be, isn't about perfect security, it's about perfect recovery in a way. And what happens when we start dealing with machines as opposed to people? How does that affect the whole situation? So takeaways. We propose a system. Every piece in this presentation has been discovered and discussed before. I'm putting it all together, and I'm not sure in the best possible way. Try and create an innovative system called SBC. And with this, we can manage tactical situations and turn them into an ongoing conflict, or at least deal with them as an ongoing conflict. So small arms races we cannot control, but strategically we can try to handle them. We need to be able to maneuver or manage tactical situations strategically. We don't want to necessarily kick at it, but once we're at the kick at it or firefighting stage, we want to be aware the system even exists. And that's critical. That's the first most amazing point there. And if we choose to firefight, we can apply these strategic principles. And there is a wider applicability. We claim, or I claim, that it's applicable to many fields. And more than that, there is an established methodology for how when these situations arise, we can deal with them. But wait, you ask, isn't this just strategy? Are you describing anything new here? And the answer is, we're adapting strategy to the landscape and the evolving threats that we are facing. Organizations don't strategize much, and usually not like this. So this is the beginning of a framework that fits our particular needs. So where do we start? This is the last part. We can start immediately with implementation. For example, every day on trust groups, we discuss this group, or did you see what this group is doing and that group is doing? Some of them are being coordinated in the response, but not many. There are working groups out there. We can do more of that. We can use cyber deception, wait for them and redirect them to where we want them to be in our organizations. I'm no longer working at a cyber deception company. I'm unemployed until I find whatever it is next I want to do, probably next month or a month after that or whatever. And then my own term, which I love, IEP, intelligence engine poisoning, left side of the OODA loop, before the OODA loop even starts if you would like. Poison their intelligence gathering so you can optimize what they're going to attack, like search engine optimization, where you want your page to be highest. What servers are they going to find? What people are they going to find? So there's a lot we can do. Now there is a challenge, almost done, in the implementation. Collaboration. How can I work with other people? Now we have seen this work before, for example, the SMTP port 25 thing on dynamic ranges, but we've also failed. BCP 38 is not implemented to this day and spoofing is possible. So it gets complicated with multiple players, but you can just quit the game and shift to another if you want to. And with that, I appreciate and apologize. I appreciate you sitting here through this, which is a more coherent model than what I've shown a few years ago. And I appreciate your time in trying to think about this with me. It's not an easy problem to solve, but I do believe that we can change the game and be better at it, because this presentation was born from frustration of doing incident response for many, many years. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. So the format of the philosophy track is that we do actually want to invite questions as a part of the talk. So we actually baked in some additional time for questions. There were a couple questions I asked, but I'm going to defer those because I want to see if anyone else has a question on this topic to Gadi. Any questions? All right. So Aaron last year, he talked about how the best way to get rid of superbugs was to do arrests. The only thing that moved the needle were arrests. How does that factor into your proposal?
That's awesome. And I agree completely, and that was a great presentation. The thing is, we have seen that even with arrests, they keep operating, and if we can take the arrests aspect of changing the way we operate, changing the paradigm and implement it somewhere else, that'll be great. That essentially resets the situation. Okay,
and then another question is, part of the thesis that you have is that there's a certain tolerance level that you would have to have for people to be accepting of superbugs or bugs before they become superbugs. In other words, we want people to have a runny nose versus having the flu, okay, or like some deadly flu. So how would you propose that we convince organizations to have a constantly running nose?
I think we can start with the awareness bit. If we're about to kick at something, stop, have a meeting, discuss it. Just that awareness alone changes the game. As to convincing organizations, we are managing to do it right now in fraud. So if we can show success, and not necessarily say, let's have the badness in, but rather, let's collect a little bit more information. We would like a longer-term project aside to what we're doing right now to reduce the pain. I think that if we discuss things in their own terminology, such as, can we reduce the costs? It might work for us. But the most important thing for me, that is why I started trust groups and being able to work together, is start to think about it, because that changes the game by itself.
Okay, and that question, by the way, what I asked was a form of what Guillaume asked. And so did I get what you were asking for?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like global warming, right? Everyone wants everyone else to do what's needed, but no one really does anything about it. And I think the problem is a lot of companies don't have their own security teams, and they rely almost only on products, right? So are we as vendors to kind of take this into consideration and say, okay, these threat actors, they're minor, they're not a big deal, so we won't, it's better to have ransomware that just deletes stuff and is recoverable than to have an all-out team that's going to destroy everything, including enterprise backups. So our product is going to allow teams that have basic ransomware, right? So I think it's just really hard to get started to convince people to take that first step.
Fair enough, and maybe you can't convince them with everything, but the question is, where can you? If you can get the organizational culture to start thinking about, we just encountered something new, let's not write a script to get rid of it. If you can go and say, we can actually collect a little bit of intelligence and do something about this. If you can show, we can collaborate on something, such as all these groups are coming out, here is the response I think we can all do right now, instead of everybody doing their own thing, or maybe we should all do our own thing when we collaborate on mailing lists. That would be a good place to start. Trying to convince an organization to allow badness in, I don't think is a good way to go.
Okay, any other questions before we move on to the next one?
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Gadi. By the way, I actually disagree with Gadi.